It comes back down to being open-minded.
Okay, right.
Traveling overseas is scary because you're away from home. So don't be afraid. Or if you do, have 10 seconds of bravery.
Halo Sobat FT, kita bertemu lagi di podcast kita. Hari ini saya akan ngobrol dengan salah seorang kawan yang berasal dari luar negeri. Namanya Adinda Peyra. Dia adalah seorang intern atau seorang yang lagi magang di Fakultas Teknik saat ini, tepatnya di Teknik Geodesi UGM. Kita akan ngobrol-ngobrol dalam bahasa Inggris hari ini. Hi Adinda, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You are here to have the internship, right?
Yes, that is correct.
With us,
at UGM.
At UGM. So, is it your first time to be in Gajah Mada?
It's my first time in Gajah Mada. It's my first time in Indonesia.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
You're from Australia, and this is your first time to be in Indonesia.
Yeah. I know many of us Australians travel to Bali, but I
Right.
have not yet had the experience of even coming to there.
There you go. You haven't been to Bali even, right?
Not even.
All right. So this is a big welcome to you.
Terima kasih.
Wow, your Indonesian is good already. Did you learn Indonesian, by the way, bahasa Indonesia when you were in Australia?
No, I didn't get the opportunity to do so. In
Alright.
my high school, I learned a little bit of Japanese. So we only
Alright.
had a Japanese tutor in high school.
Okay.
But
okay. Because I know that some schools they really teach bahasa Indonesia, right?
Yes,
In
yes.
Australia. Mhm.
It's very dependent on the teachers that are available. So if they actually have
Okay.
Indonesian under their belt or
Right.
they know Indonesian, they can then teach that. But in our case, we weren't
Okay.
as fortunate for that.
Now you can learn.
Exactly. So I've been learning while I've been here. It's been an
There you
incredible
go.
experience to be able to communicate
Maybe
with you guys.
small talk first.
Yes.
Your name is Adinda Peyra.
Yes.
That's how I pronounce it. Is
Yes.
it correct? Okay, Adinda. You know, when I heard your name for the first time, Adinda, it sounds very familiar. I thought you're an Indonesian. Can you tell me more about that? Like, your name is very interesting to me.
Yeah,
Which
of
is in a good
course.
way, in a good way.
Yeah. So I was named Adinda for two reasons, because it means in Indonesian the beloved or the little one.
Yes.
I'm the youngest of three daughters.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, so both on my father's side and my mother's side, and first generation, I'm also the youngest.
Uh-huh.
So from our cousins.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why you're Adinda.
Yeah, with the beloved, the youngest and the
The youngest,
beloved.
okay.
But the Indonesian origins comes from our history relationship with your country.
Okay.
So my oma from my father's side.
So you even say Oma,
Yes.
which means grandmother.
In
Right.
Dutch.
In Dutch, right.
So having a Dutch origins, Oma was actually born in Sumatra. And so she,
right.
yeah. So she lived in Indonesia for quite some time.
Uh-huh. So during the Dutch era,
Yes,
basically.
yes.
Right.
Around the 1920s.
Right.
There's a very good letter that she had written to my sister about her experience here. And so my great-grandfather worked in the Dutch administration,
Uh-huh.
assisted in education and supporting the
Right.
community.
Okay.
They traveled all through...
It must be like 1800 something, probably.
around the early 19th century, 1920s.
All right, because your grandma was born in 1920, was it?
Around that time.
Around, okay.
The dates I'm a little bit fuzzy with, naturally.
Right. Okay.
But so she was born in Sumatra, and they had traveled around Indonesia, mostly living in the rural areas.
Oh.
But unfortunately, due to Japanese colonization during the war,
Mhm.
they traveled back to Holland. And my
Right.
great-grandfather stayed behind to support everyone evacuating.
Oh, so he
He
stayed here.
stayed, yeah.
All
The
right.
rest of them went back to Holland.
Mhm.
And so she had grown up for a lot of her life here. She actually spoke Bahasa Indonesia as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of connections in our family to your country.
Right.
Oma had two dolls, one called Adinda, one called Saija, which is a story
Right.
that the Dutch are well known of. It reflects the Dutch colonization and how
Right.
we changed our approach to colonization of not necessarily conquering and taking your resources, but working collaboratively.
Right. Right.
And because of that, my father felt that, that name with the story, as well as, my age and being the youngest, was very appropriate for me.
Aha, wow. So you have a strong connection with Indonesia then, I mean.
Yeah, a little bit.
Can I just say to you, welcome back home or somehow, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, now about your presence here in UGM, we call it UGM, as an intern.
Yes, that's
tell
correct.
us more about it. You actually, if I'm not mistaken, you actually funded by the government of Australia.
Yes.
Okay, tell us more about that.
So I'm a part of a scholarship program called the New Colombo Program.
Right.
I am the Fellow of Papua New Guinea for the 2023 scholarship. It is an incredible opportunity for us as undergraduate students to be awarded this scholarship. It's a very prestigious one.
Okay.
The Department of Foreign Affairs in Australia provide support to undergraduate students to enter the Indo-Pacific. So we get a wide range of countries. And we get to study abroad, do an education semester.
So it is actually part of your undergraduate in Australia?
Yes.
Right? So you went to Australia for the undergrad and then you spent like
one semester in Papua New Guinea.
All right. Okay.
And then the components that the scholarship also has is language training and internships.
Right.
And so I wanted to use that opportunity as much as possible to immerse myself in my passion of volcanology and geohazards. So I traveled to Japan, traveling all across the Ring of Fire, then to your country to do an internship here.
Wow. Okay. So this is part of the New Colombo Plan program, basically.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Okay. Well, that's very good of you. I mean, also Australian government to send young people like you to discover the world in the Pacific, right?
Exactly.
How do you see that? The benefit in the future that you can.
So much benefit. It comes to just the language alone, having the opportunity to learn the languages overseas and being funded to do that.
Right.
I get friends. It's very wholesome. Communities developed. I still am in contact with friends from Japan and from Papua New Guinea. And no doubt I will have the same here in Indonesia.
Right.
Also, the difference is your ways of approaching the world, the mindsets, the cultural history, being able to be immersed into that on a day-to-day life. I'm not a traveler by jumping from one city to another. I'm physically living.
Live there.
Yeah, figuring out where my groceries are, my homestay, communicating, traveling around. And so you really get to see the mindset and the challenges that you face, but also the benefits of your country.
Yeah, very good point you made. Because sometimes we think that we can understand a lot of things by watching YouTube or reading books.
Exactly.
But it's not the same, right?
No.
Not the same as like until you really visit the country, right?
Yeah, very much.
Okay, very interesting. I think we should also encourage other people to do that same way, because I keep encouraging people to just travel with you if you have sometimes. Okay, the point is now you are here to do the internship, and the area is pretty much around disaster management, earth science.
Yes.
Tell us more about that, Adinda.
So I'm doing the internship here to look at community resilience.
Community resilience.
Yes.
Okay, right.
You have a beautiful mountain behind Jogja called Merapi. Very
Looks
dangerous.
beautiful.
Looks beautiful, from my opinion.
Yeah.
But also very hazardous, and your communities also struggle with volcanic hazards.
Right.
So my aim in this area field is to join into the community, have discussions about community resilience, what strategies they do.
Okay.
But I'm particularly focusing on communication, because when you're looking at disaster management, you need to look at the communication between the authorities, the geoscientists who are monitoring and managing the volcano, with the community and supporting them to evacuate in the timely manner, to be prepared in a timely manner, to be educated and aware of the potential risks of living around the volcano.
So that is you're looking at. So but we go back a little bit. So your background is earth science.
Yes, that is correct.
You did it in Australia.
Yes.
Macquarie University, is it correct?
Yes, Macquarie University.
Okay. And then how did you come up with the decision that, okay, I'll need to go to UGM?
Well, Indonesia was always on my to-do list. You are one of the most tectonically active countries, volcanically active countries as well. So if you look at each country and how many volcanoes they have, Indonesia's practically at the top. So my passion in volcanology already naturally drew to your country.
Right.
And then UGM, well, your departments are so very well spoken of,
Right.
you know, you have great resources, great
Yes.
education for both undergrads and masters. You really focus in the different areas of disaster management and
Right.
geohazards.
Yeah.
And even geodesy, geospatial,
Right.
which is very different to Australia because normally we have a fundamental basic of geology, and then you take your masters and you branch off from there. But you guys have started your undergrad students at a younger
Already specific.
channel. Yeah.
Already specific. Okay. Right. Yeah. When you talk about disaster, by the way,
Yes.
I agree with you. It has to be a multidisciplinary, you said,
Yes.
because we are university here.
Exactly.
So we have the social sciences also, law, all of those kind of things, even from the philosophy, also very sophisticated technology. So I think it is the benefit for us to be able to come up with something which is comprehensive.
Exactly.
I think that is one point that we really need to pay attention to. When it comes to disasters, it's completely different in my opinion, like your situation and our situation in Indonesia.
Yes, very different.
How do you see that difference? Well, I'll live in Australia for a while. You know, you have bushfire first.
Yes, we do.
So how do you see the difference, and what do you discover?
Oh gosh. Well, Australia has meteorological hazards. You're looking at more, like you said, your bushfires, so long droughts,
Right.
to cyclones and floods. Here in Indonesia, you have geohazards. You have tectonic base, tectonics being your earthquakes, your volcanics, and your tsunamis.
Right.
So the different strategies are needed to monitor them and to analyze them.
Right.
While we may use some same tools, the approach and how we look at the geology is very different.
Right. Right.
That's the comparison, but we can exchange those knowledges because those tools can still be used in the different countries. Because you are very tectonically active.
Yes. Yes.
Your landscape is evolving so fast, whereas Australia has done that historically. So we can use historical analysis of Australia to then look at how you're currently working now. And so there's this exchange that we can have in that area field.
Okay.
And like you said, disaster management is a very broad subject with multiple disciplines, from law to geoscience to sociology. So being able to incorporate our knowledge into law that helps create policies, to communication, helping society, and the development of urban planning. So that's...
Okay, now talking about, because you said the history basically.
Yes.
That Australia had very long history about disaster management and things like that. How do you see education, for example? Because we understand that without proper education about disasters, we cannot really improve things much, right? So how do you see education in Australia about dealing with disasters, and how we in Indonesia can improve about that, if you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. This has been one of my favorite areas to look into as a side-on interest during my travels.
Right.
I've realized how important education really is for disaster management, because it comes down to being aware.
There you go.
Yeah. So being aware means that you're able to identify that a risk is there. You're able to make a well-informed decision of to take that risk.
Okay.
And then how to even evacuate, what you're looking out for, the signages. So in Australia, when it comes to hazards, we are really well trained from a young age. So bushfires being our biggest disaster.
Yes.
In primary school, the school bell would go off, a fire alarm. It would be a pretend one.
Like a drilling.
A drill, exactly.
Yeah.
And so we get taken all into a patch of grass, a very large one, our oval, where we play soccer.
Right.
And we would do that year after year after year. And so it became a ritual. We knew exactly what to do without having to think too much. It's like, yep, I know that bell. I recognize it. I know where to go, and I follow my teachers. So I've noticed Japan does the same as well. So I was chatting with my Japanese teacher, and she mentioned immediately what she would do because they started at such a young age.
Okay.
Here I'm finding in Indonesia, your biggest challenge comes down to education and being aware. within one generation, you can forget about the hazards because, you know, the stories haven't been passed down.
Yes.
So therefore, the knowledge and the awareness hasn't been passed down to the next generation, which means
Right.
you're more likely to take bigger risks,
Okay.
and you become more confused in the event of a disaster.
Yeah, I agree somehow with that, because sometimes we heard story, of course,
Yeah.
right? But it is not systematically, you know, transferred through formal education.
Exactly.
Like me, for example, I keep hearing about this disaster in the 60s from my mom and from my dad. But it was only about how bad it was at the time, so not so much about how I can be prepared
Exactly.
for that. So I think that's what you see also, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so but okay, talking about stories now,
Yes.
because sometimes how to transfer the knowledge and you know, memory into different generation, it's not always through a formal process.
Yes.
Because sometimes we hate that formal process.
Yeah.
If you think that you
It
are
can be very
learning,
mundane.
right? So how do you think like stories, for example, or other mean of knowledge transfer?
It's really, really useful in some cases,
Right.
because it creates an idea of maybe not fear, but again, awareness.
Awareness.
And utilizing
Right.
maybe myths and legends to explain the extremity of the disaster or the impact of the disaster then helps you create a bit of an imaginative mind of what it actually was like.
Right.
So I know in a lot of cases there's this monster that sometimes lives under the volcano,
Yes.
which explains the geological phenomena, because
Yeah.
in essence it's just your magma chamber that
Right.
is just pushing, creating cracks. But you know, in your culture, and I've seen it in Japan, sometimes it's this monster and he can get very angry, or he's pushing and he's unhappy, or you've disturbed him, and so that explains that, okay, this mountain has the ability to create that pushing aspect, being earthquake tremors.
Earthquake tremors. Yeah.
So that anger being built up of energy, so then that emits then a volcanic eruption. So when you're getting these characteristics that are, you know, persona characteristics, then can be transferred into a geological aspect to create awareness as well.
Right. So that is really a quite effective ways, right?
Yeah, exactly.
To transfer the knowledge. Okay, now relax a little bit. Do you travel actually a lot in your life?
I've been very fortunate to travel, yes.
Right. Okay. So you also mentioned earlier when we had the conversation, you were born in Thailand or Laos?
I was born in Thailand, but we grew up in Laos for the first 4 years of my life.
Then Laos is a landlocked state.
Yes.
No coast whatsoever.
No. Waterfalls were our way of cooling.
Yeah, but you have been living in Australia for what? Long time now, right?
I'm 24 years old, minus 4 years, 20 years.
There you go.
There's the math.
So while you're overseas like this, what do you miss the most about Australia?
Gosh, what do I miss most? It's hard because I've learned to be enjoying every culture and living in every culture.
Very nice.
But I think what I miss most is the people. You know, food I can find easily. If I want a bit of cheese and wine, maybe expensive, but I can find it. But it comes down to the people. You know, it's nice to be on the phone with my mom and my dad, but to be able to hug them is something different. To have those kind of conversations. A lot of my geology friends, particularly when I'm out in the field at the moment, you know, there's a ritual in Australia. You go out into the field, you come back, then you have a couple of beers, you sit down, have a chat, yapper about whatever geology or debating, you know, of like, no, I think you're wrong. And so there are these kind of moments and characteristics in, I guess, Australian culture that I do miss. But yeah, you know, of course.
I lived there for maybe almost 10 years. Accumulatively, so I understand this very relaxed culture, conversational culture. You do the barbecue and then you have
exactly
conversation. I really but one thing that I am interested in, that you talk about people.
Yes,
I agree with that, because most of the time we don't really miss place actually. I mean places. We miss moment and people, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter where we are, but whom we are with, something like that.
Exactly.
I agree with you. Okay, that's You mentioned about food, by the way. You didn't really miss food. Of course, you can find food here, right?
Yes. Oh, look, I do miss food, particularly my mother's lasagna. I know that she mentions every time on a phone call, I have a batch of lasagna ready for you when you come home.
Wow.
But you're very lucky here in Georgia to have, multiple international influences of food. So I can sneak a lasagna here or there in some of the Mediterranean restaurants.
Right. Now, food here in Indonesia.
Yes.
How do you find that?
Oh, lezat. Lezat, yeah. Very much love it. Very spicy though.
Yeah. How do you cope with that?
You remember being at your place and you're like, your wife being like, "This is not so spicy. You should be okay." And I'm like, "It's very spicy."
So, being spicy is so relative, yeah.
Yes.
For me, for us, maybe not, but for you, it's like.
Exactly. My spice tolerance is very low. Even I think as an Australian, it is a little bit low already. But I've built it over time. And so, having a bit more sambal as I more and more with the different foods. So yeah, of course. But it's very delicious.
Right. But here in Indonesia, we have the variety.
Yes.
Of food is immense. You know that.
Yeah.
Have you tried like some of them, or how much did you? Do the adventure trying different foods, because you also traveled in Indonesia, right? That's what I understand.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I think as a foreigner, to tell the difference between the food is not as easy as a local. Because you'll taste the flavors a lot more differently to us as foreigners. I have, tried, and I think I haven't noticed too much of a difference yet. But I'm eager to get even further into the other islands beyond Java as well and see what the difference is. But in regards to the broad flavors that I've tried, of course, we've done nasi goreng and nasi mi goreng, maaf. So, of course, they're stereotypical, but, you're going into the percel and the soto ayam. That one I've definitely noticed being very different.
You know a lot already.
Yeah. Thank you to my Bahasa Indonesia teacher. She has helped a lot.
So, when it comes to food, by the way, Indonesia is like, from western tip to eastern tip, the varieties is just even me, for example, I don't really know that much yet, in my opinion, about Indonesian food. So need to travel more around Indonesia.
I think it's like that with anywhere.
And talking about Indonesia, the distance from west to east is actually more than 5,000 kilometers.
Whoa. You crossed 3 time zones, I believe.
Exactly, 3 time zones. So 5,000 kilometers, 17,000 plus islands. So of course you expect a lot of variety there in terms of even how people look.
I've noticed that
different,
too.
Right? And also food and stuff like that. Yeah. All right. Now, because you have been here now in Indonesia, Japan, also Papua New Guinea. If you have to give some small advice to people from Australia or from outside, what is your advice to them when they visit a new country or a foreign country like Indonesia or Japan or Papua New Guinea?
Open mind.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah,
I like it.
It would have to be open mind. You're going to feel uncomfortable sometimes, or out of let's say out of your skin, really. Because as I was mentioning before, your mindset in the country is very different to the Australian mindset. The approaches can be different. The day-to-day behaviors are very different. Time is a great example. Australians are very punctual. We will arrive to work on time, and make sure, if it's 9 o'clock, we're there 10 minutes before 9, generally speaking.
Yes.
Whereas in Papua New Guinea, the time is very much more relaxed. So, we've got a 10 a.m. meeting, but it might be 10:30 to maybe 11. I'm a bit held up. I'll catch you up in a second. So there's a very much more relaxed. Indonesia is a bit the same as well, where sometimes you can be quite punctual, and sometimes, depending on the situation, it comes down. Japan is also very punctual. You are there on time. So, that's just one example. You come down to conversations, the type of conversations you have. So being open-minded as you travel through is really the best way to go. So enable yourself to feel uncomfortable because you're challenging your initial assumptions of how life should be, which is then how you explore the world.
Yeah, wow, very interesting. Because it is very easy for us to judge, right?
Yeah, of course.
Indonesia is very bad in time management. Sometimes it's easy for foreigners to say that, or Papua New Guinea. But I think you have a different way to approach it. Like at least you open your mind first before you judge. And then, in my opinion, if you really think that you can suggest something, it is because you already know what happens.
Yeah.
Not because you're just blind and then shoot something in the dark. Right?
Exactly. There's cultural aspects that come into it. For instance, you guys have prayer. You know, taking the time off to make prayer, whereas in Australia, we're like, no, you keep working. But being respectful of an individual's beliefs, you know, having that balance in between.
Yes.
So,
and that actually, you have that strong respect and tolerance because you really see them, right, with your eyes.
Yeah.
Not by reading it or somewhere, right?
It's who they are.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Very, very interesting. Okay, now about your observation about Indonesia.
Yeah.
I invited you a couple of times to my class, for example, and now your observation about Indonesian students in general and or in this faculty of engineering in specific.
It was a great opportunity to actually teach your students.
Right.
I really loved it.
They love you so much. You can tell that, right?
Thank you. Yeah, it was really humbling to have them all crowd around me after the class and just keep asking more and more questions.
You know what? Even they don't do that to me. They don't ask me any
I'll
questions
take it as a big honor.
Yeah, really. Okay, please.
Yeah, so they're very inquisitive and very much wanting to learn more. I chucked them very much in the deep end. I didn't know where they were geologically on how much information they had prior. So, but even that, they were happy just to listen and ask questions. And so they understand that, okay, Australia is very different, but we share a lot of similarities, such as, you know, the not LLSVP, MAF, the El Nino and La Nina.
Yeah.
So, you know, their characteristics that your country experiences weather-wise, and Australia does too. But then also realizing how big Australia is, that we have both 2 seasons and 4 seasons. And then on top of that, the fact that climate change influences your country as well as ours, both in the same manner of, you know, exasperating disasters and other strategies, other things as well. But the main point is they're very inquisitive, and I love that they're very much wanting to learn more about the Australian culture and how they can utilize the knowledge from Australia back into your culture as well.
Yeah. You know what? I really enjoy your class. I mean, also to see the students paying attention to you. That's the most important thing to me. Even sometimes, to be honest with you, being a lecturer, teacher here, I discovered actually more things about my students when I saw them studying with you, if you know what I mean.
Ah, okay.
So they pay more attention sometimes because they have all the curiosity, right? And I don't know, because it is age-wise also, you're young, they're young. That also helps, right? But I really like to discover that they are being so, curious about what happens.
I'm happy to help anytime.
Yeah. And how do you think, because they also ask questions, right?
Yes.
About the quality of the questions and things?
They were really, really good. I remember one question being asked of, like, you know, can you perceive the ice as water or as a river or as a rock? And I found that really, really good because, in essence, yes, that is true. It is often debated, you know, is it a water or is it a rock? Because they do geologically the same sort of thing. And they carve and they erode, depending if they're solid or liquid. Yeah. So I think their quality of questions is really good. Of course, there's also that small curiosity of, like, do you like kangaroos? Because for them, no question, whether it's, you know, silly or scientific, is a bad question, because it's just wanting to learn more about what the other side of the world is like.
Thank you. That's very good. They're very good view. I mean, you're very positive on that. Talking about kangaroo, by the way, this is intermezzo. You eat kangaroo, right? I mean,
yes, we do.
Like, my joke was that Australians are maybe the only people on Earth who ate all the animals in their national logo. national
we
symbols.
have emus and we have kangaroos.
You do eat both. Huh?
Oh, do we eat emus? Have you tried emu while you're back in Oz?
That's what I heard. I didn't. I did try kangaroo.
Kangaroos for sure. Emus, I actually haven't tried. We do. We do eat crocodiles though.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Kangaroos for us are practically pests.
Okay.
There's just so many because they're
very interesting
system.
because you know when I was in junior high school or elementary school,
yeah,
we were taught that kangaroo is like a national animal, something like of Australia, which is true.
So you
somehow.
protect and you take care of.
You protect and take care. So tell us more about that now. What happened actually? I mean,
well, we've got something called the rabbit-proof fence, which was aimed to sort of keep foxes out, I think. Oh, I've got to remember this. This is where I get tricky with Australian history. Main point is that there's a line across the east coast of Australia, and because of that, it meant kangaroos are now onto one side than the other.
Okay.
And because of their reproductive systems, they're really good at reproducing. During the different seasons, they can turn off their baby in their stomach because of dry season, so no food.
Yeah.
Which means they can have a lot more babies lined up. So they act like rabbits in the sense of they breed like rabbits.
Right.
And because of that, you know, that means that they are a pest to farmers because they eat the harvest and stuff.
So by the way, kangaroo has never been protected as in because they extinct.
No,
right?
We've been really lucky with that.
All right.
Koalas, on the other hand, have had an issue.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So our 2020 and our 2019 fires, so 1920,
right. Okay.
We had extreme bushfires that actually popped our koalas onto our endangered list. But yeah, no, kangaroo-wise, we've not had any issues with them. So they're really nice lean meat, actually, and quite good to eat. And the indigenous Australians use them for a lot of things. They use them as a fur coat.
All right.
They would use the meat as well, the different components of meat for different things. And I think some of the internal intestines as well for maybe string or something for weapons. So there's multiple uses that we can try out from a kangaroo.
See, this is very interesting to me because now we discover something that we didn't really know before. So you eat kangaroo?
Yes.
Well, while I was there, I did actually eat kangaroo, of course, and also crocodile.
And how did you find it?
Crocodile, by the way, is really delicious.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it is actually a combination of chicken and fish.
Yeah.
That's how it's white, right?
Yeah.
White.
It's a white meat. It's a very good description.
Yeah. So that's to me like, and I'm a Hindu myself, so I don't really have anything, forbidden or restriction to eat. So I have the opportunity to discover more, to just explore more.
Yeah.
Crocodile. I did usually barbecue, right?
Yeah.
In the we call it all week.
Orientation week. Yes, we have a barbecue,
they had a
of
lot
course.
Barbecue, all of those, crazy stuff.
Did you ever get the chance to go to Bunnings and have a snag?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that is a very stereotypical place to get a barbecue. Every Sunday, if you're doing up your house, that's the place to go.
Yeah, Bunnings, by the way, is how do you call it? A warehouse.
Yeah, so basically
like
it's a warehouse that fills in with house appliances, gardening equipment, a variety, anything you need for your house, basically,
maybe
building
like
equipment.
Warehouse, so like Mitra 10 maybe here. Mitra 10, you have
Mitra 10, yeah, we also have Mitra 10.
Yeah, we call it here Mitra 10.
Mitra 10.
10 is 10.
Oh, 10. Oh, yeah, 10, yeah.
Yeah.
So Mitras being the Mitra.
Yeah. So yeah, we do have that too.
Yeah.
But I think the practice and tradition there is different. Barbecue is a big thing there.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a social hub for us.
Yeah.
It's how we all get together. We relax after a long week, have conversations. It could be political sometimes, but it could just be a very relaxed, what your life has been up to. It's a great way of bonding with the community and still being very close.
Right. Talking about the community now, in Australia you have this indigenous people.
Yes.
Okay. You have a long history about that. Not every part is bright, if I may say that.
Yeah.
But let us talk about this disaster management things.
Yeah, sure.
They have been living there for thousand years.
Yeah.
So they have their own way to deal with the nature. How do you see this? How do modern people like us can actually learn or adapt, or somehow, basically take some lesson learned from that in order for us to deal with the disasters?
In after the 2019-2020, we very much started to reflect on our elders, our traditional custodians of the land.
Right.
In Australia, we have over 200 colonies of Aboriginal communities.
Meaning that different tribe or
tribes.
Different
Tribes.
Oh.
So,
which also means different language, maybe also.
Well, it can be absolutely.
All right. Okay.
I'm going to use Papua New Guinea as my best example that I've experienced this. But you'd have one community that speaks a one talk system, so their Tokles, which is their local language.
All right.
The community next to it may speak a similar dialect, but you move to the community, 3 doors down. Now the Tokles is going to be very different, because geographically speaking, the distance and the topography, so your mountain ranges, then alter how you hear and how you speak the language.
Right.
So Australia being a very large continent, you go from very far south as Tasmania to very up north up in Queensland and Cairns.
Or in Darwin.
Or Darwin. Yeah. The language is going to change drastically, and that comes down to the geological landscape is also very different. In Tasmania, it's very green, very lush, very mountain range. But then you get to up in Darwin, and it's a 2-season kind of climate, and it's
basically
very hot.
Indonesia.
Basically Indonesia, yes. So very dry.
Right. Yes.
And so with that, the cultures evolve and adapt to that particular climate. So Australia has had that over 70,000 years. Our Indigenous elders had formed over 200 different tribes across Australia. Now, not all of them are existing anymore due to our colonization history, but we're trying to revamp it as much as possible and incorporate some into our education. When I was in primary school, we had an Indigenous come to our community, show the weapons that they used, type of clothing, the didgeridoo.
I know. The music.
So for anyone not knowing, the didgeridoo is a long tree trunk that they would use ants to dig basically through, eat all the way through the tree trunk, and then they would carve the rest through. Chuck it over the fire. There's processes that they go through to then ferment, well, not ferment, that's the wrong word, but to strengthen the wood, basically. And then in a technique of blowing, then it becomes the musical instrument.
Yes.
So there are a lot of cultural things. So the different different trees that are provided for the didgeridoo, the different ways of boomerangs are then different for the different communities across Australia. So you're referring to disaster management. I'll go back to that. So the 2019-2020 fires, they unfortunately destroyed...
That is one of the worst, probably,
For this modern history, yes. We were severely impacted. And because of that, we lost a lot of homes. We were very grateful to not have lost a lot of people. Those that did pass were due to being firefighters themselves, trying to save the housings, or community members staying behind to assist. I think so Holland is a small country. So just a little bit smaller than that was the amount of land that we had basically lost due to fires. And it burnt forests, our national parks, several thousand animals also died and perished as a result. So it really altered our landscape. And so we're now looking at Indigenous elders as to how do we manage this.
So did you also see that as a failure, you might say, or like,
or I think
basically it's a very big lesson.
Yes. I think with any disaster, you can count it as a failure, but you can also count it as a learning, because we're not going to improve our techniques and our strategies unless we know what we went wrong. And this is the great thing that we did after 2019-2020 is that we went, we haven't done something right. Climate change is also playing an influence. We are not using the correct strategies. Let's figure out what we can do to improve. Because it made such a horrific impact to our communities. So Indigenous Australians, the First Nations, they were very good at managing fires, because Australia has had a long history with bushfires. We're naturally a dry country.
Yes. Can
Yeah.
imagine that.
So they have used techniques over the 70,000 years to mitigate large amounts of bushfire spread.
Right.
And this comes to using slow burning. So the Europeans had come into Australia and thinking, using their cultural knowledge to implement certain strategies that they felt was appropriate for our landscape. Now, the difference is, England is very different to Australia in our ecology and landscape. And so those strategies have not been, while they've helped in assistance due to climate change, they haven't been as assistance now.
Right.
They use what we call as high heat burning.
High heat burning.
Yeah. So it's the use of, before the summer season starts, they would go out and do back burning. So they would find certain sections near suburbs area where they can burn in a safe manner. That way, if a bushfire does start somewhere in the national park, if it spreads, it won't actually... So it's like a natural barricade.
Natural barricade,
So that's how the colonizers had used the fire technique.
Right.
Or I should say not colonizers, but the modern Australians had used the fire technique. And it worked for a while, but the issue is with climate change, we've had a much longer drought period, which has meant summer has started sooner, less time to undertake those fire back burnings. And because of that, that meant that we did less back burning. So when the fire did start in the 2019,
you're not ready.
We weren't as ready. We had a lot of our eucalyptus trees that are naturally oil, all littered across the base because they hadn't been back burned. And so they were natural ignitions.
Right.
Higher temperatures, day-to-day temperatures also assisted in, fueling the fire. Winds as well were very horrific during that time. So that caused the big spread. But then we decided, well, the strategy isn't working. We're not reading the land very well. So let's turn to our Indigenous elders and see how did they do it for 70,000 years. And they use something called cool burning.
Cool burning?
Yes. So cool burning is the technique used where, before the summer starts as well, in the early mornings or really late afternoons where there's a little bit of dew on the grassland, they would then burn some of the areas.
Still wet somehow?
Still a little bit wet because it means control. They can then set alight an area of large, just meadow grass. And they can then light that up and enable that to be the natural back burning system.
Which is slow then, meaning that? It's
slow because it's lower on the ground. The modern way of doing it from our fire brigades was using the treetop canopies. This one is mostly based on the ground surfaces. And because of that, that's only burning the, let's say, the leaf litter compared to the trees itself, which Aboriginals had then understood that if we burnt just the leaf litter and not the trees, then it enabled the trees to grow stronger and bigger, which held a lot of our root systems down. And that was our biggest issue in the 2019-2020 fires, was because a lot of these trees had also been perished, that root system got uplifted. And when floods then came, everything and erosion could happen.
It's not strong enough to hold that.
Exactly. So we're now turning to the First Nations to see how did they use fire, what strategies. I mean, it was also a technique of hunting for them. So it was a multi-purpose, using it as to herd animals as well. So they can gather them into one section to then hunt them, using fire as that natural herding purpose. But generally speaking, yes, they used a slow cooler burning technique that meant that it was safe, it was in control. They used also native signals of, perhaps when a bird had been birthed or when a certain flower had been bloomed, to knowing that the landscape is telling us that it's time to now do slow burning before the summer gets too hot. Otherwise, then it's going to get too dry. So we use, in the Western way of working, a date and a time. Summer has started, this is it. Whereas they use the natural landscape, no matter when that time was, had it shifted slightly.
And also natural signage.
Natural signages, So that's the great thing that we're wanting to incorporate more and more into Australia's natural disasters. It's still in the early stages. A lot of research has been undertaken. Our biggest challenge
is...
So
this is quite a new thing, right?
We're, still 2020 was just under 4 years ago.
Yeah.
A lot of science comes behind of looking at the historical techniques, figuring out where to place this technique as well, because Australia being such a large continent, our ecology is very different from one place to another. So we need to consider how we utilize that technique into that ecology, if it's actually beneficial, and maybe adapting it as well.
Right.
And different, as I mentioned, over 200 colonies of First Nations means that their techniques are slightly different across the country. So figuring out which techniques are best for which areas is also quite important.
This is very interesting in my opinion, like very eye-opening also somehow. So even the modern people in Australia, they also learn the technique and everything.
Yeah.
And it worked at least for a long period of time. That's why they did it. But then at a certain point, they found out that it's no longer as effective as before. And then it's the time for them to change and then to look at what your ancestors had done before. Okay. I think this is actually a very universal lesson, don't you think?
Very much
like even for us, the government, for example, in Jakarta, of course they know and they have a lot of scientists, modern one, but sometimes we fail to understand the practice.
It comes down to communication.
Yeah.
The pinpoint is science is just another language.
Right.
Your ancestral history is just another language. As I was mentioning, looking at Merapi, you have myths and legends around Merapi. You have ways of communicating through those myths and legends about the awareness of risk and when to possibly evacuate.
Okay.
But it's not told in a scientific manner. So trying to look at how you guys communicate and how science communicates and trying to bond them together is the best way for disaster mitigation in this modern era, I think.
Right. I agree with that. So basically, sometimes because we just don't understand or we don't really, we cannot really find a specific way to communicate, we then choose something, which is when you apply that, maybe 100 years from now, it might not be as effective, right?
Exactly.
So you need to find another way to communicate.
Yeah.
It's like you said earlier, maybe 100 years ago, when you say that there's a monster down there below the volcano, that's enough. That already explained everything to them, at least at the time. But now we can no longer use that same story or same technique of communication. Right?
Yeah. It's not as efficient because you need more detail.
Right.
But you can still use it as a base and build on with science.
Right.
For instance, making a simple science diagram of Merapi with a subduction zone.
Right.
Placing the Sultan's Palace in it, knowing that there is this triangle between Merapi, your Sultan's Palace, and your ocean.
Yeah.
Still incorporating your historical knowledge while also reflecting the scientific way of tectonics nowadays in this modern era.
So basically combining those,
Yeah,
so
using both.
We should not reject completely something and then, adopt something. Okay, right.
Otherwise, you're not going to listen.
Right.
You still believe one thing, and that's rightly so. That's your history, your culture. We cannot say that is wrong.
Yeah, and also you mentioned about, for example, why do you learn from the elders? Because it is proven they've lived there for 70,000 years, and they're still there. So it means they must have something really good to deal with and to cope with whatever dynamics that the earth has provided them with.
Experiences.
Right. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Now a little bit about education here in Indonesia, because you've been here for how long now?
I think I'm just on 3 months now.
3 months, right? Not long, but I think you've discovered some points. Okay, when it comes to education, because you've been to my classes, different classes, to see the facilities. How do you see in general, facility-wise, in our faculties of engineering, like the facilities of the education? Do you think it's sufficient, or how do you, because you can compare it with Papua New Guinea probably, while Japan is of course very good in general?
I think your facilities are quite good for sure.
Right.
They are different in Australia in regards to, of course, your accessibility of technology.
Right.
I know Indonesia versus Australia, economically speaking, has its challenges.
Right.
which means accessible technology because you need money for that. But you're very savvy. And including Papua New Guinea, you're all very savvy on what you do have. You use very well and you know very well. And you then take a different approach. So Papua New Guinea doesn't necessarily focus very strongly on the technical side of it because they are with the tools that they have, they're based on the field work. So they're very good on the field instead of them being in the laboratory based. So I think it's hard to compare on the quality, I guess, because it comes down to what we have accessible. And that then kind of plays into advantages versus disadvantages. And you can't compare a chicken to a kangaroo. They're two very different. I mean, I don't know why I chose those animals. But the point being is like you can't compare the two when the situation is very different. I think the education is still very good and you teach your students very well in the knowledge. So they still have the theoretical base and the practical base. It's just different to Australia.
Okay. So you think that they are, because some of them, I ask you, do you want to continue your study to overseas, like Australia?
Yeah.
They really like to do that. Do you think they're ready for that?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. It's always going to be a big step into a new place.
Yes.
It's not the education side of it necessarily because it's always going to be new information, but it's the ways of working, the culture aspects. We condense our lectures very much with theory. And so I can get to the end of the class and I'm like, my brain hurts. And here you guys start looking more onto your websites very quickly on where to extract that information first. So, you know, if they were to come to Australia, I think they would do very well. It's just being able to adapt into the schedules of, okay, an assignment's coming, and so how do I manage that? Or now I have 4 units, and I think some of your students may only take 2, and so that's a personal, social stuff, not necessarily the education itself.
Okay, right, very interesting. You know that we have been talking for about an hour.
Oh, it's been quite a while.
Like, I like this conversation, that's why we don't really feel it's very long. Maybe some few last questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, future plan.
Yes.
For you, because now you've been to Japan, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia too. Do you have anything in specific that you would like to do in the future?
I have yet to decide that.
Right.
I very much have the passion for volcanology and disaster management. Whether that be work or masters, I'm not sure yet. I'm obviously reaching out across the board to see what opportunities are available, but I'm not being very selective on what it is because I'm just interested for the journey that will come with it. My main aim is just to be a geoscientist monitoring and modeling and assisting communities so they become more resilient to geohazards. So, you know, that could be in Indonesia, that could be in New Zealand, that could be in Australia, that could be, you know, somewhere in Europe. There's a whole heap of areas that they focus on.
There you go.
I don't mind where. I'm just very interested to still be a part of the community.
If or when, for example, scholarship available in Indonesia, do you feel that you...
I'd very much look into it, yes.
Oh, okay, right.
Your country is very beautiful. And it's like practically a playground for me with all your volcanoes.
So I think this is a message for our university. If we can provide scholarship for Adinda will be happy to stay and do master degree here probably.
Yes, masters.
All right, now the last question because this is 1 hour already.
Yeah.
I want you to give message to 2 parties.
Okay.
First is for someone like you from overseas who would like to have the opportunity to be here, or what do you think? Why do you think they want to come here?
Yeah.
That's one. And second, later on, I would like you to give some message or whatever advice to Indonesian students who would like to discover the world. If you...
I think both will be hand in hand, to be honest. Okay. It comes back down to being open-minded.
Okay, right.
Traveling overseas is scary because you're away from home. So don't be afraid. Or if you do, have 10 seconds of bravery.
So 10 seconds. I thought it was 20. No, it's 10.
Either way, just enough to give you that
I agree with
that momentum of push. And don't be afraid to reach out. There is a wide world of people who focus in geohazards and disaster management. So if you're interested in it, don't be scared to make that email and send it. You never know what it leads.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I really am happy to have conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Alright teman-teman, sahabat FT, kita sudah ngobrol tadi dengan Adinda. Semoga bermanfaat. Terima kasih.